With camp in full swing, I think it's a perfect time to really highlight the true maturation process and what the result looks like now of the QB1 for the future in Kyler Murray. Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner _ Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen. Free wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. It's going to be a fun show today. Former associate of mine, good friend of mine, Jody Oehler, is going to join me here in a second to kind of talk Kyler Murray. I mean, it's funny how he's the most important player on the team, yet everything else gets discussed a lot more than he does because he's kind of old news. You're kind of looking at new news, new players, new positions, position battles, and things like that, like I've discussed over the last couple of weeks. But we'll highlight Kyler Murray. Is this going to be a run-first team? They've got so much talent on offense. Are they really just going to run the rock and be boring? Usually, if you know everydayers, you know that boring is good. Boring wins. Monty Osford has been boring. If this offense is boring in 2024, I'll be happy about it. And then realistic expectations, as I mentioned with Kyle Odegaard yesterday and Tyler Drake the day before. I always want to do the last segment picking the brain of guys who have been in the industry for a long time in the Valley with realistic expectations going into 2024. Today's episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sport stops sporting. We know the drill. But this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. Without further ado, my former associate, I'm not going to say boss, and I never give you that credit. It's the producer Jody Oehler show, Fox Sports 910 The Drive, 6 to 10 a.m. Monday to Friday. Dude, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Just to be clear, I could have fired you. I never wanted to.
Okay.
But I could have.
I appreciate that. I want to see the contract where that's where you actually had fine. We went through COVID together, bro.
Yeah.
we know each other a lot more than we thought we would when you were in a cupboard doing the show for 18 months, it seemed like. And one thing before we start, so I turned 40 this past September, okay? And for those that don't know Jody, he's very particular about specific things, and he thinks that as you age, certain things they become your personality through osmosis. One of them is grilling once you get older. I've hit that point where I get it now.
You've discovered the joy and just the tranquility of some raw meat on an open flame, and that's just Saturday night, man. That's a good time on a Saturday night.
Yeah, and for me, it's just I don't have to talk to people as much. It's like leave me alone, let me grill, give me a beer, and
put a beer in your hands. Shut out the world for a while. Pretty soon you're going to be gardening. Gardening's the next step. You go next level gardening. Now you can really talk a good game.
I mean, if I have to call you and say I'm gardening, I'm moving to the moon at that point.
Well, you also know that my absolute apex of living is going to be when I have model trains in my garage and I can just spend my time with model trains. So like I'm still climbing towards that. I'm not there yet. I'm not the final boss of ultimate fatherhood yet.
I mean, somehow you're an 80-year-old and a child at the same time. I don't know how it happens. But something that we've experienced since 2019 has been this whirlwind, weirdness, undefinable, majestic, magical, just kind of hodgepodge that is Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
And you've been one of the bigger critics, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about this today specifically because, it's not all Cliff. It wasn't all Cliff. Kyler had a lot of fault at that as well. I think for me, the biggest thing was when he started to show introspection through social media, which is counterintuitive to every other player that you'd ever discuss in Arizona. But I think that when he made that 0-1 jump, like, okay, I'm not going to be a hermit anymore. You're going to see more of me. I'm going to be more level-headed. He tore his ACL, and we see a completely different person now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's also, something he brought up in his training camp availability the other day. It's year 6. I mean, he is the 6th year of the National Football League. If light bulbs don't start going on in year 6 about why you haven't won more, why you're not on these lists, why you're so easily able to be excluded from certain things, and you're Kyler Murray and you're used to being the guy, then you have some problems. So I absolutely agree. I mean, I feel like social media is, good or bad, is kind of the window into that generation's entire existence. And once he started kind of being comfortable and celebrating teammates, it was kind of indicative that he was comfortable being in front of people and celebrating teammates. And it's not like, I always try to draw the distinction because I don't want to create false expectations for Cardinals fans. Like, Kyler Murray is not going to be invited to give a TED Talk anytime soon. Like, he's not wow, that guy is a dynamic speaker. And boy, he's just like Mel Gibson and Braveheart. And I can't wait to follow him into battle. Like, that's never going to be who he is. What was such a big focal point for me and others was he was more angsty teenager. Like, let me just go to my room. Gosh, why am I here? This is stupid. Practice is stupid. And it was such a bad look for the face of the franchise. Now he has just seemingly accepted the basic responsibilities of like, stand up straight, make eye contact, speak clearly and with some emotion. The tone is there. The right messaging is there. Celebrating teammates. Kyler Murray, I talked a lot about Clancy. I'm sure you haven't remember when we did together was so much for Kyler Murray early on. After a win was me. Mm-hmm. After a loss, it was them. Now, I think we're finally starting to see that healthy flip where after success, it's going to be us. And after failure, it's going to be me. It's a huge flip for Kyler Murray.
Yeah. And, it's something that seems to now be happening naturally. Like, he made that 0-1, so it's not forced anymore. It's not like I'm doing this because I have to. And it's not the Dan Patrick interview. Like, we're obviously eons beyond that. He's an adult now. And yeah, year 6 is like, I get in this debate with my friends. Like, would you rather have a guy pop off like Joe Burrow immediately and kind of withstand, or have a guy that ramps up a couple extra years and then really hits that peak naturally at the NFL level? And that's what we're looking at with Kyler Murray. We're going to find out in the next 2 seasons, really next season, but 2 seasons. And I agree with you. I think it's team first. He's flying everybody out. They're doing off-season workouts. He's paying for everything. He's doing all that stuff. But he's doing it because he wants to and not because he thinks that's the right thing to do. And I think that's a huge, Jody, it's like we never thought we were going to see it.
No.
It doesn't matter how good he is on the field. Doesn't matter who the coach is. We never thought we were going to see it. What do you think the biggest reason is why we're seeing it, aside from him just growing up? Is this Jonathan Gannon kicking him in the nether regions like, bro, this is how you do it. Do you want to do it or not?
Oh, yeah. No, I think Jonathan Gannon has a huge part in this. Part of maturity is your environment that you're in, right? And if you're, you remember when you were a kid, probably still true, Clancy, where if you got a bunch of knucklehead buddies that are a bunch of knuckleheads, like, it's hard to be the older, wiser, mature guy. And I just feel like under Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury, it was not an environment that placed an emphasis on maturity and professionalism. It was an environment that placed an emphasis on just do what you can to not get exposed as a fraud. And I feel like Kyler Murray was stunted both professionally and personally in that environment. I also think, and this has been brought up many times, it's not a novel concept, that his injury and just the fragility of health was an awakening for Kyler Murray. Like, oh, I'm not different from everyone else. My body is made of ligaments that can snap. And I do have a shelf limit and a time limit of what I can do in this body. And I feel like that combined with Jonathan Gannon's environment has just created, a really healthy environment for him to really accept what it is to be a quarterback, accept to be a leader. I always try to draw a distinction. I have no idea what Kyler Murray is away from the football field. Maybe he's always been the most mature guy in the room and nobody's ever had to worry about him, pulling a Dwight Howard and being like the goofiest, silliest guy at 25 or whatever. But I think as a football player, Jonathan Gannon is serious about success. I always frame it with Kyler of like, he's always had the big things, man. And I know that's an interesting way to frame it for a guy that's always been knocked for his size. But like athleticism, talent, arm strength, football IQ, all of the big things, he was the number 1 pick, all of the trappings of that. It was the little things that he wasn't doing. Now, the little things he's embracing, and those become the big things, and he's doing all of them. And that's why I'm so bullish and excited on Kyler and the Cardinals this year.
Yeah, and that's a good transition into, is this going to be a run-first offense? Because he always had to save everybody. And now maybe realizing he doesn't have to do that anymore and maybe he can be a 21 for 24 for 230, 2 touchdowns, and maybe a pick here and there, and they win more games than they lose without him having to have 400 all-purpose yards and 5 touchdowns to make it happen. I feel like all of that culminates in this is natural. This is an organic story of a kid who had no guidance, who had no coach, who was always the best player on the field just by walking on it. And then now it's like, oh, wait, tears ACL at open field, as you mentioned. It wasn't a big hit. And then it's like, now you got a lot of time to sit with yourself like, this ain't working. And then I think the perfect timing of Cliff getting fired and the perfect time of Jonathan Gannon coming in, I think you sum that up perfectly. Now, the big question is, are they going to run the ball a lot with all of these talented pieces on the outside and in the slot? Now, we'll discuss it next. Jody Oehler, Fox Sports 910 at Radio, Jody joining me. We'll discuss it next. This episode of Locked on Cardinals is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive, and eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered, man. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right. Jody Oehler, Fox Sports 910 The Drive, 6 to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday at Radio Jody on Twitter, former associate of mine. It was one of the funniest things, and we'll get right back, is the drive to the station when it was Walking Dead out on the freeway. Because, listen, even though you got to be at the station, I was normally there at 4:30. There was some straggling people driving to work and stuff like that. When I was going in as a necessary employee with my FEMA card, it was like the freeway was closed, and I was the only one allowed to drive.
Well, you were the only one in there, because for about 6 months, I was not going in. I was doing the show from my master bedroom closet, screaming hot takes at 6 a.m. and waking up our entire household that was stuck inside a house like a bunch of sardines for a few months. And then finally, when we got the green light to go back in, because that wasn't my choice to be at home.
Right.
Like, like people that don't know, like it's literally just me in a studio. Was not like you're doing it in a crowded elevator or something. So yeah, those were interesting times for us. They were interesting times for the Cardinals. I mean, you look back on those times and you're just like, man, that organization was at arguably its absolute worst from a professionalism, from a cohesiveness, from a competency perspective. Like the Cardinals in 2020 and 2021 and into 2022, I mean, we're arguably as poorly run now. We know this with hindsight, with all of the different leaks and stories. And one of my favorite things that I talk about the Cardinals team right now, Clancy, is like, I don't think there's ever been a better environment conducive for success within the Cardinals organization ever than right now for the Arizona Cardinals. And I think that's a huge win for a franchise that has largely been just struggling with the basics for most of its existence, aside from a few pops and blips on the radar.
Yeah, you can and I agree with that, and I've said that on the show. I completely agree. It's like you're speaking in platitudes, but because it's so extreme, the polls of what we've seen with this organization, one of the most perennially losing organizations in the history of the sport. One of the most poorly run. And then when you see these things, it's like, it's not hard to say that this is the best situation there's ever been. Like, it's not hard. It seems pretty obvious.
Have you seen the Steve Keim brand boss promotional video for his new company?
I have.
So
interesting.
Yeah, he has launched a new venture where he is charging up to $5,000 for middle schoolers and high schoolers to submit their game film for him to review. And I thought of you this morning because on the show, I'm like, he should just call this Sweet Andy Evaluations. And it's basically just, if you're a sub 6 foot wide receiver, send Steve Keim $5,000 and he'll tell you you're an NFL draft pick. And then I was like, it'd be even funnier if I had $5,000 to burn, which I don't. I would just send Andy Isabella's high school highlights in and see if Steve Keim sends back a glowing review. You know what I mean? All these years later, he's still reviewing Andy Isabella. You try to find somebody who's really good with video editing and scrub all the Isabella, from the backplate, and then just watch Steve Keim send back an email when they you have Sunday football potential, young man, and then send them DK Metcalf Sunday film. They'd be I think you're a little too big and a little too strong. You might be a walk-on somewhere. That's who was running the entire organization for 10 years, man. It's wild.
That's wild. It's wild because the one thing that you have to do as a GM is draft well, and you have to be able to evaluate talent. And now we evaluate other people's talent. Doesn't make any sense. Now, with that, the Dumb and Dumber could have totally redeemed yourself moment was if you flip Josh Rosen and DK Metcalf, you're GM of the year. He had the opportunity to do it, but he's you know what? Easy way. I'm good. Let's take the UMass cat who had a whole bunch of receiving yards in college. That's got to mean more.
I also speaking of Josh Rosen, some real Josh Rosen in Miami vibes with Desmond Ridder here in Cardinals land. It's, he did start. He was a well-regarded rookie. Granted, Josh Rosen was a first-round pick. Desmond Ridder wasn't, but there was you can see it unfolding in training camp. You're oh, this dude might just not be good at all. And there's no harm, no foul. I mean, they traded Rondale Moore, who had no role on this team and was a running back last year. And it's not a knock on the organization because I think taking a flyer on Desmond Ridder made sense. But he has not looked good at all.
Yeah, it's and I talked about that a little bit yesterday. I saw some film and I did see a couple of your tweets about it too. It's and it actually transitioned nicely into this. The thing with his skill set, I was cataclysmically, say Kyler Murray and Clayton Tune get hurt, and Desmond Ridder's got to play some games. At least if it's a run-first offense, we saw Josh Dobbs do it last year. Okay, so there's more talent. The offensive line's going to be better. James Conner hopefully healthy. They've got 38 running backs. I know Amari Demercado is really, establishing himself as potentially the RB2 on the initial depth chart. Is this unequivocally a run-first team, irrespective of the talent with Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr., et cetera, on the outside?
I don't know that I would go that far. I think you're right in that running the ball is going to be the key to the entire offense. So if you call that an unequivocal run-based team, then I could understand that. But I think the run is going to be used to set up the pass. But I don't think that means it's going to be a 60-40 run-pass split. I think they know how to use the players on this roster and put them in a position to succeed. And I think it's Jonathan Gannon's greatest strength as a head coach is he puts players in positions to succeed. He doesn't put players in position to fail. Mark DeMarcado is a great example. Is he a great third down back? Is he a guy that can catch some balls? Sure. Is he ever going to put him in a position where he's carrying, 8 straight times and it's a third quarter of a one possession game on the road against the Seahawks? Absolutely not. So I think running the ball is wildly underrated in the way the national media talks about the Cardinals, was they led the NFL in explosive runs last year for a long time. They use it to set up Kyler Murray's play action. And then they draft Marvin Harrison Jr. Trey McBride has a breakout final, 8 weeks of the season. And suddenly everybody thinks that they're going to be this spread them out, 4 wide, throw the ball 40 plus times. That is not happening. Running the ball is going to be absolutely essential to what they do. But I think at times last year, they relied on the run because their passing game was so inept. So last year was not just simply a reflection of their offensive philosophy. It was a reflection of their offensive talent. And Josh Dobbs can run the ball better than he can pass the ball 25 times a game. So I think with Kyler Murray's skill set, we're much more likely to see a really healthy balance of running and passing. And I think it'll all be used in a very symbiotic way to complement each other, not to cover up for one deficiency, which is what happened last year.
Yeah, for sure. And that's accurate. And then, but you look at, which is kind of going to be inside out here. Remember the Kenyon Drake years where they're running the ball inside the 5 3 times, right into a pile 3 times. They're 6'3" across in the wide receiver room. So the red zone, I see Kyler Murray throwing a lot more touchdown passes this year than rushing, because what Kyler Murray's great at is, the element of surprise inside the 10-yard line is something that is unbeknownst to me how people don't know that he could potentially run the money. He's been great with that. That's one thing you got to give Cliff a little bit. Once a year, he calls that right play call where it's, a naked boot or something like that, and Kyler Murray waltzes into the end zone. Trey McBride, 6'3", Michael Wilson, Zay Jones, Marvin Harrison Jr., like, you're right in the sense that they won't need to run the ball for the offense to work. But I think that, Kyler Murray's numbers could be sneaky ballooned in the touchdown sense, even though they may run the ball more, just because obviously the talent on the outside, but how they're going to set that up, running the ball between the 20s and then having, Disneyland down by the goal line, I think is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, a couple things about that. On some sports books, Kyler Murray's passing total over-under is 21.5. I think that's low. I think that's an easy play on the over. And even if it were 22.5, 23.5, I'd feel pretty comfortable predicting if Kyler Murray plays 15-plus games, he's going to have 26, 27, 28-plus touchdowns. As far as running the ball, it's very early. And
of course,
we don't have a lot to base on. But Trey Benson, I put this in a tweet after watching him a couple training camp practices. I described it as he looks stuck in the mud a little bit. Rookie running backs, swimming, thinking, not running. It's hard when you're in a camp situation, even with pads on. It's not really a game situation. You can't really show your tackle breaking skills or your open field elusivity. But I would caution fantasy fans and Cardinal fans that Trey Benson, who I'm not in any way down on, looks probably more like a second half kind of weapon for the Cardinals to use. And that right now, and this could change quickly, but right now it looks like Amari DiMercato, James Conner, and we'll see what happens with Michael Carter and DJ Dallas. But I think that's important because if Trey Benson was just coming out and was just like, holy crap, this dude, they found the guy, might be RB1 in the third round, then I think running the ball becomes something they just have to do because they know how well it can work. I think it's flipped a little bit. I'd be shocked if James Conner duplicated his season a year ago, just because, first career 1,000-yard season, he'll be injured. And I think they're going to want to throw the ball instead of having 8 carries for Amari DiMercato. I'd rather have 4 more targets to their receiving group. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And there's one thing that we haven't talked. We'll talk on the other side. What does the run game have to do with the defense? I'll discuss it next. Jody Oehler, Fox Sports 910, joining me. We'll be right back. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. Love them a lot. Never want them to stop. But it's baseball season. And listen, nothing wrong with baseball. Baseball, I say this countless times a month with these live reads. I wish baseball was my favorite sport because it's like March Madness 6 months out of the year. Morning to night, you get baseball, 162 games. And you know what? Even though sports aren't sporting like they normally do with just baseball, FanDuel's got you covered. All customers get a boost or a bonus every day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So go over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right. So, Jody, at Radio Jody, drive Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m. 4 hours. I'm doing 30 minutes, man. Woo! I miss it, though. I do miss radio.
You're basically doing the first day of training camp, and I'm like 4 hours a day is like 2 a days, old school, outside. You know what I mean? Like Bruce Arians would get these guys out at like 10 a.m. They do 2 a days. Yeah, 4 hours is a long time, though. It's a long time.
It's a long time. It's a long time. He does a great job over there. We go back long. He does a great job. Yeah, of course. So the tease, what does the run game have to do with the defensive side of the ball? And we're going to parlay this into Jody's expectations for the 2024 season. The best defense the Cardinals are going to have seemingly in 2024 is keeping the offense on the field. And I think that's one thing why, and that's not necessarily fair. Most likely that's going to be the case because the defense is still a work in progress. I say this year's defense was last year's offense, where they're a year away. There's a lot of talent infusion that's needed. They got a whole bunch of cheese after this season to be able to spend on free agents and their full bevy of picks. But that's why I'm more bullish on the side of milk that clock, baby, and keep moving the ball down the field if I'm picking one side or the other. And obviously this is predicated upon the offensive line and, everything like that. But that's why I'm more like, well, it's a dangerous game if they become more of a pass-happy team. This defense can't overcome 1 minute, 25-second 3 and outs, like a defense of years past could.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think you're 100% right. I think that the time of possession game, the field position game are going to be hugely important because the defense, as we saw last year, Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rollis are kind of masters at maximizing the talent they have. And I think the secondary is going to be better than people think. I think the pass rush, particularly the edge group, is going to be worse than we thought. And nobody thought it was going to be particularly good. But I think that they do a really good job of maximizing what they have. It's just, you can only do that so much if the defense is on the field forever. They don't have any true stars yet that have established themselves defensively. So what their identity is, the defense. They were a mix and match front schemes, looks, how many guys up front, how many guys in dime, nickel package. We don't know exactly what they're going to sort of base their entire defensive identity on other than the brain power of their two defensive coaches. But I think you have to be able to win one-on-one matchups and get to the quarterback. Darius Robinson's flash. There's some optimism there. I think Dante Stills is an underrated guy from a year ago. Obviously, they brought in Bilal Nichols and a few other guys to really beef up the rotation and keep everybody fresh. And I think the defensive line will be improved. But I'm out on Zaven Collins. I understand why coaches look at him and think we can make something. He's incredibly strong, big, build exactly like you want a football player. He's a prototype sort of defensive football player. I don't think he's going to be an anchor of an edge rusher. So I do think that's going to be a problem for the Cardinals.
I've agreed. I mean, I've said that, while every position group is important to win-loss and all that stuff, obviously, I feel like the cornerback group is going to be the most directly correlated with how many games the Cardinals win this year. And it's because it's not the unknown, oh no, what has Steve Keim done? It's the unknown, how long is this going to take? Because I feel like you trust Monty Ossenfort is going to get exposed, has a bad connotation. We're going to find out who Monty Ossenfort is on the defense this year. Because this is going to be that foundation for what needs to happen after. And we don't know anything about these guys. We know their skill set. We know Max Melton is a hard hitter. This isn't a Patrick Peterson cornerback room anymore. These guys are hitters. Buda Baker and Jalen Thompson are going to make up for some of it. But you're right. Without a pass rush, they didn't have a sack for half the season at the end of the season last year. They have a murderer's row in the first 10 weeks of quarterbacks and wide receivers and all this stuff, So that's why I find it hard to believe as we pivot into actual expectations, this defense being good this year. You're looking for average at this point.
Yeah, I think in quarterback play, to your point, is directly correlated to pass rush because you could have in their prime Patrick Peterson, Richard Sherman, and Darrelle Revis out there on the outside. But if nobody can get home to the quarterback, they're going to get beat because if you give quarterbacks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds to make plays, they're going to make plays. So I really like Max Melton, Garrett Williams, Sean Murphy-Bunting. I think the talent level of that group is really deep, but it's completely dependent on a pass rush. So I agree. I think expectations, everything I believe about the Cardinals is they're headed in the right direction. I think they're going to be better than people think. I think they'll play meaningful games in December. I think there's a real chance. The formula, as you alluded to there, is if this offense is great and there is the potential for this to be a top 10 NFL offense, that is a plausible reality with the skill position talent they have. If it all comes together and they've got a top 10 offense and an average, 14 to 17th ranked defense, DVOA in the NFL, they could win 9 games in the NFC and they could be in contention for a wild card. And I feel like that is a really fun expectation. I think it's a realistic one, but not a or else expectation. But I think it's possible. You got to look at the other side. If they have no pass rush, if there's injuries at quarterback, this could be another 4 or 5 win team. And we have much bigger questions at the end of this year than we did last year. But that's not something I'm focused on because I don't think it's what's going to happen.
Yeah, right. It's a much more controlled environment now. I mean, with Kyler Murray being healthy, that's number one. If he gets hurt again, we're going to be having different conversations. Right. Especially now because that contract is now team-friendly, which makes it tradable, which makes the Cardinals getting a lot more draft picks, makes all of those things happen. But, that's something anybody could injure at any point. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with me. I'm like, top 15, they're making the playoffs. They're there if it's a top 15. If it's top 20, they're going to be in the hunt. That's all you want them to be in week 14, right? Is in the hunt. Because that means things are going well. They made it through the murderer's row of, Josh Allen and Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff and Jordan Love and the Jets and the Chargers and all these teams that they have to play early on in the season. If you had to nail everything on the head, everything considered what we talked about, what you talked about on your show, The Drive, Monday through Friday on Fox Sports 910, how many wins do they have with schedule, unknowns on defense, Kyler Murray's injury potential, and the upside of this offense all kind of mashed into one?
I think one of the keys that you rushed over there is I would rather play all those teams early in the season than late. I think the Cardinals are going to be better suited to beat those teams. I think they'll beat Buffalo in week 1. I think I think Buffalo is like, hey, man, we know what we are. We're trying to figure out what the next version is. But I think early season Cardinals is probably going to be the best version of the Cardinals. And then as the injuries stack up and everything that happens in a normal season, I got 9 wins. I think they're a 9-8 team. I frankly think they're better than the Saints, the Panthers. I think they're better than the Seahawks this year with all the changes in Seattle. I think they're better than the Commanders and the Giants. I think this is going to come down to the Bears, the Cowboys, maybe the Falcons and the Rams for one of those final wildcard spots. And I kind of like the Cardinals' chances. If I had to, I would say 9-8 and they sneak their way into a wild card game. But that's largely a reflection of the NFC more than it is, necessarily the state of the Cardinals.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's what I've said this offseason a lot, and I would assume you'd agree in some respects as we wrap this up here that the Cardinals have never had as opportunistic of a trajectory that they have right now. They've got everything. Everything's lined up. And again, this isn't a platitude. This isn't speaking with hyperbole. It's been a terrible organization forever, aside from the Super Bowl and then, the NFC Championship game, which was a mess. Like, it's not hard to do. If they win a lot of games this year, you hope the Cardinals pick in the 20s. If they're picking at 5, something terrible happened.
Right.
Like, it's probably going to be 12, 13, 14, something like that. But, yeah, I mean, have you ever been more excited? I don't know. This isn't rhetorical. Have you ever been more excited going into a Cardinal season with your 18 years on radio, whatever, 20 years on radio than you are today?
No, I believe in their leadership. I believe in what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're going to try to do it. I believe that they have smart people who are good at the basics of their job, that have a level of competency from top to bottom that creates a culture of success. And I think they'll win 2 or 3 games this year because of their culture. I think the pre-snap mistakes are gone. The shooting yourself in the foot is gone. The, hey, let's put a square peg in a round hole and hope nobody notices is gone. And I think they've elevated the overall talent. I think there's decent depth at a number of position groups on this team. So they're heading in the right direction. I would agree wholeheartely. I don't think I've ever been as genuinely optimistic about the trajectory of the Cardinals as I am heading into this year. And, I've been wrong many times before. It might look really wrong in hindsight, but that's what I see. That's what I feel. And that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Jody, Oehler, and myself talking positively for 33 minutes for
Right.
the Arizona Cardinals, things are different. Jody from The Drive, Fox Sports 910, Monday through Friday at Radio Jody. Thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, man, you're the best. Appreciate it.
Alex Clancy, Locked on Cardinals. Remember, without you, there is no me. I'll talk to you Monday.